The battlefield stretched across the valley like a graveyard of broken dreams, littered with the remnants of a war that should never have been fought. Smoke still rose from the scorched earth, carrying with it the acrid smell of burnt metal, and something far more unsettling, the scent of alien blood, so different from anything found on this world that it made even the oldest wolves recoil. Kale Nightfang stood at the edge of the carnage, his massive frame silhouetted against the dying light of day. As Alpha King of the Northern Territories, he had seen countless battles, had led his pack through wars that would have broken lesser beings. But this senseless slaughter between his kind and the alien forces who had crashed onto their planet 3 months ago filled him with disgust that went bone deep. "My lord," came the gravelly voice of Marcus, his second in command. "The scouts report the area is clear. The Zaelith ships retreated beyond the mountain range. We've won. Won." The word tasted like ash in Kale's mouth. He surveyed the carnage with eyes that glowed amber in the gathering dusk, a color that had darkened over the centuries from the bright gold of his youth. At 700 years old, he had earned every scar on his body, every shadow in his gaze. "Have the healers see to our wounded," Kale ordered, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Burn the dead with honor, both ours and theirs." "Theirs, my lord." Marcus's tone held barely concealed disapproval. Several other wolves who had gathered nearby exchanged uncertain glances. Kale's lip curled, showing just a hint of fang. "They bled. They died. That earns them the dignity of proper funeral rites. Or have we become so monstrous that we've forgotten what it means to honor the fallen?" No one dared argue, though the tension rippled through the assembled wolves like wind through tall grass. They dispersed to carry out his orders, leaving Kale to his brooding surveillance of the battlefield. That's when he caught it, a scent that didn't belong among the dead. It was faint, nearly drowned out by the overwhelming smell of carnage, but unmistakable. Life, alien life, clinging by a thread. His wolf stirred beneath his skin, that primal part of him that was never fully human, never fully beast. Something about that scent called to him in a way he couldn't explain. It was wrong. All of this was wrong, but that fragile thread of existence pulled at something deep in his chest. Kale moved through the debris with predatory grace, following the scent past twisted metal and broken bodies. His pack had strict protocols about alien survivors. They were to be captured, interrogated, then turned over to the council of elders who would decide their fate. It was a cold practicality born from war. But as he rounded the skeletal remains of what had once been a Zaelith transport vessel, all thoughts of protocol evaporated. She lay partially buried beneath a collapsed beam, her body twisted at an angle that would have killed a human instantly. But the Zaelith were not human, and she clung to life with a stubbornness that he recognized in himself. Her armor, if it could be called that, was shattered, revealing skin that shimmered with an iridescent quality, like oil on water. It shifted between shades of deep violet and midnight blue, marked with intricate patterns that seemed to move in the fading light. Her face was turned toward the sky, eyes closed, and Kale found himself transfixed by the angular beauty of her features. The Zaelith were humanoid enough to be familiar, alien enough to be unsettling. High cheekbones, a delicate jaw, a mouth that seemed just slightly too wide. But it was a crown of crystalline protrusions that swept back from her forehead like a warrior's helm that marked her as something other, something not of this world. Those eyes opened as he approached, and Kale felt the air leave his lungs. They were wholly black, without iris or white, like looking into the depths of space itself. And in those depths he saw pain, defiance, and something else, a recognition that she was looking at death and refusing to beg for mercy. "Sharkai," she whispered in her own tongue, a word he didn't understand but felt in his bones. Then, in accented but clear common, "Finish it." Kale crouched beside her, and up close, he could see the extent of her injuries. The beam had crushed her lower spine. Even without medical training, he could tell that she would never walk again, never fight again. For a warrior race like the Zaelith, that was a fate worse than death. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice softer than he'd intended. "Commander Zuras of the Seventh Fleet." Pride rang in her voice despite her broken body. "I am Sharkai, Blade of Honor, and I ask you for an honorable death, Wolf." She knew what he was. Of course she did. His kind didn't exactly hide their nature on the battlefield. "I am Kale Nightfang, Alpha King of the Northern Territories," he replied formally. "And I don't grant death to those who can still live." Something flickered in those bottomless eyes. "This is not living. Not for my kind. I cannot walk. Cannot fight. I am Shakor, broken weapon. Leave me to the mercy of your elements. If you will not grant me mercy yourself." A voice in his head, the voice of reason and responsibility, told him to do exactly that, to walk away, to let nature take its course. The Zaelith were enemies, invaders on his world. She was a commander, responsible for countless werewolf deaths. Every rational thought pointed toward leaving her to die. But Kale had not become Alpha King by always listening to the rational voice. He had led for 3 centuries by trusting his instincts, by following that deeper knowing that resided in the wolf's heart rather than the man's mind. And his wolf wanted to save her. "No," he said simply, and began to shift the beam. "What are you doing?" Panic crept into her voice for the first time. "I told you. I heard what you told me." Kale grunted with effort as he leveraged his supernatural strength against the metal. "I'm choosing not to listen. You don't understand. Among my people, to live Shakor is to live in shame. It would have been better if—" The beam came free with a shriek of tortured metal. Kale tossed it aside like it weighed nothing and turned his attention back to her. "Your people's customs die with your people. You're in my territory now, under my law, and I don't abandon those who still draw breath." Before she could protest further, he scooped her into his arms with surprising gentleness for someone his size. She was lighter than he'd expected, her body temperature several degrees cooler than a human's. The iridescent patterns on her skin pulsed weakly, like a dying star. "This is madness," she whispered, but her head lolled against his chest, her strength failing. "Your people will never accept this." "They'll accept what I tell them to accept," Kale said with grim certainty. "I'm their king." He was wrong, of course. He realized at the moment he carried her into camp. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Wolves who had been tending wounds or cleaning weapons stopped mid-motion, their eyes tracking him with expressions that ranged from shock to outright hostility. The scent of aggression filled the air, setting his own wolf on edge. "My lord." Marcus materialized at his side, his face carefully neutral in that way. That meant he was furious. "What are you doing?" "Taking a prisoner to the healers," Kale replied evenly. "Have them prepare. The healers won't touch her." It wasn't Marcus who spoke, but Elena, the head healer, a silver-haired woman whose age was betrayed only by the wisdom in her eyes. She stepped forward, her expression carved from granite. "We heal our own, Alpha, not the enemy who killed our sons and daughters." A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembled wolves. Kale felt the collective will of his pack pressing against him, a pressure that would have made a lesser Alpha bow. "Since when do we refuse medical treatment to the wounded?" His voice carried the edge of dominance, that Alpha command that demanded obedience. But Elena had known him since he was a pup, and she met his gaze without flinching. "Since they came to our world uninvited, since they burned our villages, since they showed us no mercy when they had the chance." Her voice cracked slightly. "My grandson died 3 weeks ago on a battlefield just like this one, cut down by a Zaelith weapons. Don't ask me to save him now." Kale felt Zarnias tense in his arms, though she remained silent. He could feel her heartbeat, rapid and weak, against his chest. "I'm not asking," he said quietly, and that was somehow more commanding than any shout could have been. "I'm telling you, this is my decision, my responsibility. If you cannot find it in yourself to help, then step aside and let me do it myself." "You'll start a rebellion," Marcus warned in a low voice. "The pack is barely holding together as it is. The other alphas are already questioning your leadership, saying you're too soft, too reluctant to commit fully to this war. If you save an alien commander, if you show her mercy when she would have shown us none, they'll see it as weakness." Kale looked down at the woman in his arms. Her eyes had closed again, her breathing shallow. She was dying, and everyone in this camp would celebrate her death. "Let them see what they will," he said. "I see a warrior who fought with honor and lost. I see someone helpless who needs aid. And I see a test, for myself and for every wolf here, of whether we're still civilized beings or if we become the monsters the Zayla propaganda claims we are. He started walking toward the medical tent, and the crowd parted before him. But their silence was heavy with judgment. He could feel the fractures forming in his pack's loyalty, could sense the resentment building like a thunderhead on the horizon. But he didn't stop. Inside the medical tent, he laid Xarnas on a cot with careful precision. Her eyes flickered open, finding his in the dim light. "Why?" she asked, and the question held genuine confusion. "You gain nothing from this. You lose everything." "Maybe," Cale admitted. He pulled up a stool and sat beside her, beginning to assess her injuries with hands that had learned field medicine out of necessity. "Or maybe I'm teaching my people a lesson they've forgotten. That strength isn't about who you can kill. It's about who you can save, even when it costs you." "A foolish lesson," she murmured. "One that will get you killed." "Probably." His fingers moved along her spine, feeling the damage there. His healing abilities, like all werewolves, were formidable for his own kind but useless for hers. Their physiologies were too different. But I've lived 700 years by trusting my instincts. They've never steered me wrong yet. "Your instincts are broken, Wolf King." Despite everything, Cale found himself smiling. "Maybe, but they're my instincts, and I'll follow them to whatever end they lead." Over the next 3 days, that end looked increasingly dark. Cale tended to Xarnas himself, since no healer would come near her. He cleaned her wounds with supplies stolen from the medical stores, fashioned splints and bandages, and sat vigil as her body fought to survive injuries that would have killed her kind's warrior spirit, if not their flesh. During those long hours, they talked. At first, it was simple things, translations of words, explanations of customs. But as the hours bled into days, the conversations deepened. She told him of her world, a planet called Zeldar, where crystal spires reached toward 3 moons and the ocean sang with bioluminescent life. She spoke of a culture built on honor and combat prowess, where warriors were revered above all others, and to be unable to fight was to be nothing. "I had a daughter," she said on the second night, her voice distant. "Kiranias, she would be 17 in your years. When I left for this campaign, she wept and begged me to stay. I told her that duty called, that honor demanded I fight." A bitter laugh escaped her. What honor is there in this? In being invaded by desperation, attacking a world not our own because ours was dying. Cale looked up from where he was changing the dressing on her side. "Your world is dying? Why do you think we came here? For glory." She turned her head away. "Our sun is failing. We have perhaps 50 years before Zeldar becomes uninhabitable. The Council sent out expeditions to find new homes. Your world was the most compatible we found. So this is an invasion born of survival." Cale processed that, feeling the weight of it settle over him. That doesn't excuse the violence, but it explains it. "Nothing excuses it," Xarnas said bitterly. "I am a warrior, and I did what warriors do. I followed orders, fought the enemy, killed when necessary. But I never forgot that every life I took had a story, had people who would mourn them. And now I'm broken, and I wonder if this was my punishment for all those deaths. To live without honor, without purpose." "You're wrong," Cale said firmly. "You're wrong about honor, about purpose, about what makes someone worthy. Those are lies your culture told you to keep you useful as a weapon. But you're more than a weapon, Xarnas. You're a person with thoughts and feelings and a daughter who needs you to survive, even if you never make it back to her." Those black eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made his breath catch. "You speak heresy, Wolf King. I speak truth. There's a difference." Outside the tent, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Marcus reported that 3 of the regional alphas had sent messengers demanding Cale's presence at an emergency council. Rumors spread to the pack that their king had been compromised, possibly mind-controlled by alien technology. Small fights broke out between wolves, those who trusted Cale's judgment and those who saw his actions as betrayal. On the 3rd night, it came to a head. Cale was sleeping in a chair beside Xarnas' cot when the tent flap burst open. He was on his feet instantly, wolf rising to the surface, eyes blazing gold in the darkness. 5 wolves stood at the entrance, led by Demon, a young alpha from the Eastern Territories. They were armed, their body language aggressive, and Kale could smell their intent like smoke. "Stand aside, Nightfang," Demon said, his voice hard. "The council has voted. The alien dies tonight." "The council," Kale said softly, dangerously, "does not command in my territory." "I do." "Your territory? You've lost the right to call this your territory when you betray your own kind for that thing." Demon gestured at Zarnes, who had woken and was watching the confrontation with those fathomless eyes. "Careful how you proceed, pup." Kale's voice dropped to a growl. "You stand in my camp, threatening my prisoner, and you think you'll walk away unscathed? We're not afraid of you, old wolf." But Demon's voice wavered slightly. "Your age has made you weak, made you sentimental. The pack needs strength, not mercy. You confuse mercy with weakness at your peril." Kale began to circle, placing himself firmly between the intruders and Zarnes. Mercy is the hardest choice, the strongest choice. Any fool can kill. It takes real power to save. "Pretty words from a pretty king," one of the others sneered. "But words won't stop us." They moved as one. A coordinated attack meant to overwhelm even an alpha. But Kale Nightfang had not ruled for 300 years by being easy to overwhelm. The transformation took him in an instant, bones realigning, muscles expanding, his form flowing from man to something between man and wolf, a hybrid state that was the true form of a werewolf. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, covered in midnight black fur, with claws like daggers and fangs that could tear through steel. The fight was brutal and swift. Kale didn't kill. He'd meant what he said about mercy, but he broke bones, tore flesh, reminded these young wolves exactly why he was called king. Within minutes, all 5 lay groaning on the ground, their blood staining the tent floor. Kale stood over them, breathing hard, his human consciousness warring with the wolf's desire to finish what they'd started. Slowly, painfully, he pulled the wolf back, forcing the transformation to reverse until he stood human once more, naked and covered in blood that wasn't his own. "Get out," he said quietly. "Go back to your territories. Tell the council that any who wish to challenge me can do so properly, in formal combat, at the next gathering. But if anyone comes for her again, I won't be so gentle." They fled, limping and bleeding, and Kale stood alone in the wreckage of his mercy. "You shouldn't have done that." Zarnes' voice came from behind him. "You've marked yourself as a traitor to your kind. They won't forgive this." Kale turned to face her, not bothering to cover himself or clean the blood away. Let her see what her salvation had cost. "I know." "Then why?" It was the same question she'd asked 3 days ago, but now he had an answer, or at least, he thought he did. "Because 700 years ago, I was young and stupid, and full of the same pride that drove those wolves tonight. I believed that strength was everything, that showing mercy was weakness. And because of that belief, I did things that still haunt me. I killed when I could have captured. I destroyed when I could have negotiated. I was a monster wearing a crown, and everyone celebrated me for it." He moved to sit on the cot beside her, suddenly exhausted. 200 years ago, I met a human woman. Her name was Sarah, and she was a doctor who worked in a village at the edge of my territory. Humans and wolves didn't mix much back then, too much bad blood. But there was a plague, and it was killing both species. She asked for my help, for wolves to donate blood for her research. My advisor said no, said the humans could rot for all we cared. Kale's hands clenched into fists at the memory. I listened to them. I refused her. And because of that, 237 people died, humans and wolves both, before Sarah figured out a cure on her own. She died 3 days after she distributed the last dose, the plague finally taking her too. What does this have to do with me? Zarnes asked softly. Everything. Nothing. Kale looked at her, at this broken warrior whose life he decided was worth more than his crown. I swore after Sarah that I would never again let pride or prejudice or politics stop me from doing what I knew was right. And when I saw you on that battlefield, when you asked me to kill you, every instinct I have screamed that saving you was right. Not convenient, not politically smart, but right in that bone-deep way that can't be explained or reasoned away. Your instincts will be the death of you, Wolf King. Maybe, but at least I'll die being the person I want to be, not the monster everyone expects." They sat in silence after that, the weight of everything unsaid hanging heavy in the air. Outside, Kale could hear the camp beginning to stir with the approaching dawn, could feel the anger and confusion of his pack like a living thing. Over the following weeks, the situation evolved in ways Kale could never have predicted. The other alphas came to his territory, as he'd known they would. They demanded explanations, threatened challenges, accused him of everything from treason to insanity. Kale faced each one down, using every ounce of his authority and power to maintain control. Some left convinced, others left angry, but unwilling to challenge him directly. A few tried, and Kale defeated each one in formal combat, reinforcing his dominance through the only language young wolves truly understood. But with each fight, each confrontation, he felt himself being pushed further from his pack. They obeyed, but the easy camaraderie was gone. Where once they had looked at him with respect and affection, now there was wariness, sometimes fear. All because of the alien woman who lay paralyzed in his camp, guarded day and night by the Alpha King himself. Zara healed slowly, her Zala physiology knitting flesh and bone with painstaking care. But the damage to her spine was permanent. She could move her arms with difficulty, could turn her head, but from the waist down she remained motionless, trapped in a body that had once moved with a warrior's deadly grace. Kale watched her struggle with her new reality, saw the moments when despair would cloud those bottomless eyes, when she would stare at the tent ceiling, and he knew she was wishing he'd left her to die. But he also saw her strength, saw how she adapted, how she began to explore what her life could be now that combat was no longer the center of it. "Tell me about your daughter," he said one evening as he helped her sit up to eat. It had become his habit to ask her questions, to keep her engaged with life. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Kiranias is everything I wasn't at her age. Thoughtful where I was impulsive, gentle where I was aggressive. She wanted to be a historian, not a warrior. The council disapproved, but I defended her choice. Ironic, isn't it? I fought for her right to choose a path that wasn't combat, but I never questioned whether combat was the right path for me." "It's never too late to question," Kale offered. "Isn't it? I'm Shakor now. Even if I somehow returned to my people, I would be nothing, an object of pity at best, scorn at worst. Then don't return to your people." The words were out before Kale could stop them, and he saw her head turn sharply toward him. "Stay here. Find a new purpose, a new life, with the wolves who hate me, under protection of a king who's destroying himself to keep me alive." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's not a life, Kale. That's a slow death for both of us." She was right, and he knew it, but admitting it felt like giving up, and giving up had never been in his nature. The breaking point came 6 weeks after he'd pulled Zaranias from that battlefield. An emergency council was called, not by the regional alphas, but by the Council of Elders, the ancient wolves who serve as the ultimate authority over all packs. They convened at the sacred grounds in the heart of the territory, and Kale's presence was not requested but commanded. He almost didn't go. For 3 days, he debated refusing, staying at Zarnias' side, and damned the consequences. But Marcus came to him on the 3rd night, his old friend's face grave. "They're talking about stripping you of your title," Marcus said quietly, "declaring you unfit to rule. If you don't go, if you don't defend yourself, they'll appoint someone else as Alpha King. And the first thing that new king will do is execute her." So Kale went, leaving Zarnias under heavy guard, protection she needed now as much from his own people as from any external threat. The sacred grounds were deep in the forest, where the trees grew so thick that even midday felt like twilight. The Council of Elders sat in a semicircle, 9 ancient wolves whose combined age exceeded 5,000 years. They had seen empires rise and fall, had guided the wolf packs through countless crises. Their word was law. Elder Morgan, the eldest among them, spoke first. "Kale Nightfang, you stand accused of betraying your kind, of placing the life of an enemy above the welfare of your pack, of actions that have brought discord and division to the wolf nation. How do you answer these charges?" Kale stood straight, his chin raised, every inch the Alpha King. I answer that I have done exactly as accused. I saved the life of an enemy soldier. I have protected her against those who would harm her, and I have done so knowing full well the cost. A ripple of shock went through the assembled wolves. Apparently, they'd expected him to argue, to make excuses. You admit to betraying your people? Elder Thomas's voice was incredulous. I admit to following my conscience, Cale corrected. If that constitutes betrayal in your eyes, then I am guilty as charged. But I do not see mercy as betrayal. I see it as the highest calling of leadership. Mercy? Elder Morgan's eyes flashed. You speak of mercy for one who has shown none to us. The Zaelith have killed thousands of our kind. They invaded our world without provocation, burned our homes, slaughtered our young. And you speak of mercy? Yes, Cale said simply. Because if we become the monsters they believe us to be, if we abandon every principle that separates us from mindless beasts, then we've already lost. What good is winning a war if we lose our souls in the process? Pretty philosophy, Elder Marcus, no relation to his second-in-command, said dryly. But philosophy doesn't win wars. Strength does. Unity does. And you have undermined both with your actions. Have I, Cale challenged, or have I shown what true strength looks like? Any alpha can order deaths. Any leader can demand blood for blood. But it takes real courage to choose mercy when everyone around you is screaming for vengeance. It takes real strength to stand alone against the mob and say, "This is wrong, and I won't participate." You stand alone because you are wrong, Elder Morgan said, and there was sadness in her ancient eyes. The individual cannot supersede the collective, Cale. One life, even one you feel compelled to save, is not worth the fracturing of our entire society, isn't it? Cale looked at each elder in turn. Because I remember a time, 300 years ago, when a young alpha challenged the practice of leaving weak pups to die in the winter. The council of that day said the same thing you're saying now, that the individual didn't matter, that the good of the pack require hard choices. But that young alpha persisted, and now we don't abandon our young. We're stronger for it. That was different, Elder Thomas argued. How? Because those were our own? Because suffering within the pack matters more than suffering outside it. Cale shook his head. I refuse to accept that. I refuse to believe that empathy has boundaries, that compassion is a resource to be rationed. Then you are a fool, Elder Morgan said bluntly, and fools cannot lead. The judgment hung in the air like a blade ready to fall. Cale felt the moment shifting, felt his crown slipping from his grasp. In a few moments, they would vote and he would be deposed. Someone else would become Alpha King, and Xarnias would die, unless he gave them what they wanted. I'll make you a deal, Cale said suddenly. One more chance to prove that my way is the right way. The elders exchanged glances. What kind of deal? Elder Morgan asked cautiously. The Zaelith are desperate. Their world is dying, and they came here out of survival, not conquest. They're losing this war. We both know it. Within 6 months, maybe less, they'll be forced to either surrender or retreat entirely. Cale spoke quickly, ideas crystallizing as he talked. Let me negotiate with them. Let me offer them terms that don't involve complete annihilation. We have territory we don't use, land that could support colonies if they're willing to live peacefully. You want us to give the invaders land? Elder Thomas looked aghast. I want us to end this war without having to exterminate an entire species, Cale corrected. The Zaelith are warriors, yes, but they're also people with families, with children, with a civilization worth preserving. Xarnias has a daughter. Did you know that? A 17-year-old girl who's going to lose her mother because we can't find it in ourselves to offer mercy. One daughter against thousands of our dead, Elder Morgan said, but her voice had softened slightly. Today it's one daughter. Tomorrow it's thousands of daughters, theirs and ours, if this war continues. But if we can broker peace, if we can show that coexistence is possible, Cale let the possibility hang. And if you fail? Elder Marcus asked. If the Zaelith reject your offer, then you can strip me of my title and do whatever you wish with me. But give me 3 months. That's all I ask. 3 months to prove that there's another way. The elders deliberated for hours while Kale waited, his wolf pacing restlessly beneath his skin. Finally, Elder Morgan called him back. "We will grant you your 3 months," she said. "But understand the terms clearly, Kale Nightfang. If you fail to broker a lasting peace, you will step down as Alpha King. Furthermore, the alien in your care will be handed over to the Council for judgment. We may not be as merciful as you." It was a trap, and Kale knew it. The chances of successful negotiation were slim. The Zaelith leadership was proud, unlikely to accept terms from those they viewed as beneath them, but it was the only chance he had. "Agreed," he said. He returned to camp as dawn broke, exhausted mentally and emotionally. Marcus met him at the perimeter, his expression grim. "Well, 3 months to negotiate peace. If I fail, I lose everything, crown, title, and her." Marcus whistled low. "That's a hell of a gamble." "It's the only play I have left." Kale moved toward the medical tent, suddenly desperate to see that Zarnias was all right, that she'd survived the night without him. She was awake when he entered, those black eyes tracking him as he crossed to her cot. She'd grown stronger over the weeks, could sit up on her own now, though movement below her waist remained impossible. "You look terrible," she observed. Despite everything, Kale found himself smiling. "Thanks. You know how to make a male feel special. What happened at the council?" He told her everything, the accusations, his defense, the deal he'd struck. As he spoke, he watched emotions play across her alien features. Concern, resignation, and something else he couldn't quite identify. "You're a fool," she said when he finished. "So I've been told. The Zaelith won't negotiate. Our leadership—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "They're desperate, yes, but desperation makes people rigid, not flexible. They'll see any offer of peace as a trap. Then we make them see it differently." Kale pulled up his usual stool. "You're a commander. You know how they think, how to appeal to them. Help me? Why would I do that?" But there was no heat in her question, only curiosity. "Because you have a daughter who deserves to grow up in a world that isn't constantly at war. Because you've seen what this conflict costs on both sides. Because—" He reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, and touched her hand where it rested on the cot. Her skin was cool, the iridescent patterns swirling at the contact. "Because I think you're tired of death too. I think you want another way just as much as I do." Zarnias stared at their joined hands for a long moment. When she looked up, those bottomless eyes held something Kale had never seen in them before. Hope. "I'll help you," she said quietly. "But Kale, if this fails, if they come and execute me at the end of your 3 months, I want you to let them. Don't fight for me anymore. You've sacrificed enough. That's not going to happen. Promise me." "No." He squeezed her hand gently. "Because I've learned something over these past weeks, Zarnias. I've learned that some things are worth fighting for no matter the cost. And you're one of them." She opened her mouth to argue, but he pressed a finger to her lips, silencing her. "No. No more talk of death and honor, and what your people expect. You're more than Shakor, more than a broken warrior. And I'm going to prove it to you, even if it takes the rest of my very long life." The next 3 months were the most challenging of Kale's life. First, he had to convince the Zaelith to even consider negotiating. That meant capturing one of their communications officers alive. No easy task, given that the aliens had learned to fear werewolf ferocity. But with Zarnias' help, he orchestrated an ambush that resulted in a single Zaelith soldier being brought back to camp unharmed. The soldier, a young male named Torkas, was terrified at first, certain he would be tortured or killed. His shock when he saw Commander Zarnias alive, being treated with dignity despite her paralysis, was almost comical. Through Torkas, they sent a message to the Zaelith command. Alpha King Kale Nightfang wished to discuss terms of peace. The initial response was, as Zarnias had predicted, rejection. But Kale persisted, sending message after message, each one crafted with her help to appeal to the Zaelith's sense of honor and pragmatism. Tell them about the northern valleys, Zarnias advised during one of their late-night strategy sessions. The land there is rich but unclaimed by your packs. The climate would suit our people. cooler than most of your territories. And what do I ask in return? Kale studied the crude map spread across his desk. Technological exchange. The Zalith have advanced medical knowledge, energy systems that could benefit your people. Frame it as mutual cooperation, not surrender. They worked like that for weeks. Kale and Zarnais, Alpha and Commander, two former enemies plotting peace instead of war. And somewhere in those long hours, something shifted between them. It started small. The way his hand would linger when helping her adjust her position. The way her eyes would track him when he moved around the tent. They would catch themselves staring, would feel the air grow charged with something neither could name. "This is foolish," Zarnais said one night, when the tension between them had grown so thick it was almost suffocating. "Whatever you think you feel, it's just proximity, circumstance. Is that what you tell yourself?" Kale didn't move from where he sat across the tent, but his eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. That this is just circumstance. What else could it be? We're different species, from different worlds. I'm your prisoner, dependent on you for my survival. Any feelings between us are corrupted by that power imbalance. You're right about one thing. We are different species. But that doesn't mean we're incompatible. He finally rose, crossing to her with slow, deliberate steps. And you stopped being my prisoner the moment I decided to save you. You became something else entirely. What? The word came out barely a whisper. Kale knelt beside her cot, so their eyes were level. A challenge, a revelation, a reminder that there's more to life than duty and war and the endless cycle of violence. He reached up slowly, giving her time to refuse, and traced one of the crystalline protrusions that crowned her head. "You're beautiful, Zarnais. Your people may see you as broken. But I see someone who survived impossible odds, who adapted when she could have given up, who chose to help broker peace instead of nursing her bitterness." "Kale," her voice held warning, but also longing. I know all the reasons this is impossible. I've listed them to myself 1,000 times. His hand moved from her crown to her cheek, cupping it gently. But my wolf doesn't care about reasons. And neither, I think, does your warrior's heart. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, two beings from different worlds balanced on the edge of something terrifying and wonderful. Then Zarnais made her choice. She leaned forward, closing the distance between them, and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle, exploratory, two people learning the language of each other's desire. Her mouth was cool against his warmth, her lips softer than he'd imagined. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing heavily. "This is still foolish," Zarya said, but she was smiling, the first real smile he'd seen from her. "Absolutely foolish," Kale agreed and kissed her again. They didn't speak of it after that night, but everything changed. The way they worked together became more fluid, more intuitive. Kale found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone. Fears about his leadership, regrets about his past, dreams for a future he'd stopped believing in. And Zarnais opened up in return, speaking of her life before the war, of the daughter she missed with an ache that never faded, of the person she'd been before duty had hardened her into a weapon. "I was a teacher once," she admitted during one late-night conversation. "Before I joined the military, I taught xenobiology at the academy. I was fascinated by other life forms, other ways of being. The irony isn't lost on me that I ended up killing the very things I once wanted to study." "You could teach again," Kale suggested. "If this peace works, if we manage to create a settlement, your people will need teachers. Need someone to help the younger generation adapt to this world. A paralyzed teacher." But she didn't sound as bitter as she once would have. A teacher with experience, wisdom, and a unique perspective. He took her hand, that gesture that had become natural between them. "You're not defined by what you've lost, Zarnais. You're defined by what you choose to do with what remains." She turned to him, those black eyes searching his face. "How did you get so wise, Wolf King?" 700 years of making mistakes, and hopefully learning from some of them. After 6 weeks of persistent messaging, the Zalith finally agreed to a meeting. But they had conditions. It would take place on neutral ground, with limited guards from each side, and Kale would come unarmed. "It's a trap," Marcus said flatly when Cale announced his intention to go. "They'll kill you the moment you're vulnerable. Maybe, or maybe they're as desperate for peace as we are, and this is the only way to prove we're serious." Cale checked the provisions for the journey. "Either way, I have to try. Let me come with you at least. Or take some of the younger alphas." "No. The more wolves I bring, the more it looks like a show of force rather than a genuine peace offering." Cale paused, then put a hand on his old friend's shoulder. "If I don't come back, Marcus, you'll make a good Alpha King. Better than me in some ways. You'll do what's necessary." "And the Zealot commander?" Cale's jaw tightened. "Protect her. No matter what the council says, you keep her safe. Promise me." Marcus studied him for a long moment. "You love her?" It wasn't a question, but Cale answered anyway. "Yes. God help me, but yes." "She can't give you children. Can't be your mate in the traditional sense. The pack will never accept her. I know all of that. Doesn't change how I feel." Marcus sighed deeply. "You've always been a stubborn bastard. Fine. I promise. If you don't return, I'll protect her for as long as I'm able." Saying goodbye to Zarnais was harder than Cale had anticipated. She'd grown stronger, could move her upper body with most of her old grace, but she was still confined to the cot, still dependent on others for her basic needs. The frustration of being unable to fight beside him, to protect him as she'd once protected her own soldiers, was written clearly on her face. "Come back," she said simply as he knelt beside her one last time. "Whatever happens in that meeting, come back to me. I will. I swear it." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her mouth. "And when I do, we're going to talk about what comes next. For both of us. Cale, no arguments. Not now. Just wait for me." She touched his face, her cool fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "I waited my whole life without knowing what I was waiting for. I understand now. So yes, Wolf King, I'll wait." The neutral ground chosen for the meeting was an ancient forest clearing, a place considered sacred by both the wolves and, as Cale learned, the Zealots who had been on this world long enough to recognize power when they felt it. Trees older than Cale himself ringed the space, their branches filtering the sunlight into cathedral-like beams. The Zealot delegation arrived first. 5 figures in ceremonial armor that gleamed with that same iridescent quality as Zarnais' skin. The leader was immediately recognizable by the more elaborate crown of crystals that swept back from her head. This was High Commander Serlin, overall leader of the Zealot forces on Earth. Cale approached slowly, hands clearly visible and empty. He left even his clothes behind in favor of simple pants and a shirt that couldn't conceal weapons. It was a vulnerable position, one that made his wolf howl with unease, but necessary to show good faith. "High Commander," he greeted her formally. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." Serlin studied him with eyes like Zarnais', black and fathomless. "Alpha King Nightfang, your messages were persistent, and the fact that Commander Zarnais lives and apparently works with you is intriguing. She lives because I chose mercy over vengeance, and she works with me because she's wise enough to see that this war serves neither of our peoples. Mercy." Serlin's tone was difficult to read. An interesting choice of words. "We have been led to believe that your kind knows only violence, and we've been told the same of yours. Perhaps we've both been lied to." Cale gestured to clearing. "May we sit?" This conversation deserves more than a rushed exchange. While standing, they settled on opposite sides of a fallen log that had been there for centuries, a natural negotiating table. Cale explained his proposal. Land in the northern valleys in exchange for technological cooperation and a formal peace treaty. The Zealots would be allowed to establish colonies, but under strict conditions. No military installations, no further expansion without negotiation, and full integration into the planetary governance structure that would need to be created. Serlin listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When Cale finished, silence stretched between them for long minutes. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why offer us this when you're winning the war? Our forces are depleted, our supply lines stretched thin. Within months, you could drive us from this world entirely. So why offer peace?" Cale had prepared for this question, had rehearsed answers with Zarnais. But in the moment, only truth felt right. Because I've lived long enough to know that winning isn't everything. Because destroying your people won't bring back our dead. Because he paused, choosing his words carefully. Because I've learned that the measure of a leader isn't how fiercely they can fight, but how wisely they can choose not to. You speak like Xerxes. Sarah Lynn's head tilted slightly. She was always different from other commanders. Too thoughtful, some said. Too willing to see the enemy as people rather than obstacles. It made her both a brilliant strategist and a controversial figure among our military. She's an extraordinary person, Cale said simply. Her paralysis hasn't changed that. If anything, it's freed her to become something more than just a weapon. You care for her. Again, not a question. Yes. Sarah Lynn was quiet for another long moment. Your proposal has merit, but I cannot accept it on my own authority. Our council must approve, and they... She hesitated. They are not as open-minded as I might wish. They will see this as weakness, as surrender. Then don't frame it as surrender. Frame it as strategic repositioning. You came to this world because Zaeldar is dying. This proposal gives your people a new home, a fresh start, without the cost of continued warfare. Your young can grow up in peace. Your families can reunite. The knowledge and culture of the Zaelith can be preserved rather than slowly ground down in an unwinnable conflict. And what are the wolves who won't accept aliens in their territory? Your own people are divided. King Nightfang. I have intelligence reports. Sarah Lynn's gaze was sharp. Many of your alphas consider you compromised. There are whispers of challenges, of rebellion. How can you guarantee this peace when you cannot even guarantee your own position? It was a fair point, and one that Cale had worried over himself. I can't guarantee anything except my own commitment. But I can tell you this. I've ruled for 300 years because I've always found a way to bring even the most divided factions together. I'll find a way to make them understand that peace is strength, not weakness. Just as I hope you'll find a way to make your council see the same truth. Sarah Lynn stood, and Cale rose with her. I will take your proposal to the council. But Cale Nightfang, she used his given name deliberately, a gesture of respect. Know that if they reject this, if they choose to fight to the last rather than accept your generous terms, it will not be because they doubt your sincerity. It will be because pride and tradition are sometimes stronger than wisdom. I understand, but I ask that you fight for this, Commander. Fight as hard for peace as you fought in war, because our peoples deserve better than mutual destruction. They parted ways with formal bows, and Cale began the long journey back to his camp. He'd done everything he could. Now it was in the hands of the Zaelith Council, and all he could do was wait. He returned to find his camp in turmoil. In his absence, one of the young alphas had attempted to force his way into the medical tent where Xerxes was guarded. Marcus had stopped him, but the incident had inflamed tensions. Wolves who had been on the fence about Cale's leadership were now openly questioning it. You need to address this, Marcus told him grimly. And soon, or we're going to have open revolt on our hands. That night, Cale called an assembly of all wolves in the territory. They gathered in the central clearing, hundreds of them, their eyes reflecting the light of the great bonfire that burned at the space's heart. Cale could smell their anger, their confusion, their fear, could feel the packed bonds that had once been strong as steel now frayed and fragile. He stood before them, his alpha presence commanding silence, and spoke from his heart. I know you're angry. I know you feel I betrayed you by saving the life of an enemy, by protecting her when you believe she deserves death. I know some of you think I'm weak, that I've gone soft in my old age, that I'm no longer fit to lead. A murmur rippled through the crowd, but no one spoke openly. You're right to question me. A good alpha should be questioned, should be held accountable for their choices. So let me explain my choice, and then you can decide whether I'm worthy of your loyalty. He told them about Sarah, the human doctor whose death had changed him. He spoke of the cycles of violence that had dominated his long life, of the realization that strength without mercy was just brutality with better PR. He talked about Xerxes not as an enemy or an alien, but as a person who had shown courage, wisdom, and a willingness to change. I saved her because it was right, he said simply. Not convenient, Not politically smart, but morally right. And if you cannot follow a leader who does what's right even when it's hard, then I'm not the alpha you need. He paused, letting that sink in. But I'm asking you to trust me one more time. Trust that the peace I'm trying to build is possible. Trust that we can be strong enough to show mercy, brave enough to choose coexistence over destruction. Trust that the path forward isn't through hatred and war, but through the kind of courage that chooses to see former enemies as potential allies. And if the Zealoth reject your peace, someone called from the crowd. If they spit on your mercy and come at us again, then we fight, Kale said without hesitation. But we fight knowing we tried every other option first. We fight with a moral high ground firmly beneath our feet. And we fight understanding that even then, we must not become the monsters we oppose. He let his gaze sweep across the assembled wolves, meeting as many eyes as he could. I'm 700 years old. I've been your king for 3 centuries. In that time, I've led you through wars, through famines, through plagues and political upheaval. I've never lied to you, never asked you to follow blindly. I'm not asking you to follow blindly now. I'm asking you to be brave. To be better than your base instincts, to be the people I know you can be. The silence that followed felt eternal. Then, from the back of the crowd, a young wolf stepped forward. Kale recognized him. Finn, barely a century old, who had lost his father in a Zealoth attack 2 months ago. I hated you, Finn said, his voice carrying across the clearing. When you saved that alien, when you protected her, I hated you. Because my father died at their hands, and I wanted revenge. I wanted blood for blood. He moved closer, his young face twisted with emotion. But tonight, listening to you, I realized something. My father died fighting. It's what he wanted, what he chose. But I don't want to die fighting. I don't want my future children to die fighting. I want... He struggled with the words. I want whatever you're offering. This chance at peace, at something better. So if you'll still have me, Alpha King, you have my loyalty. One by one, other wolves stepped forward, pledging their renewed loyalty. Not all of them. Kale could see faces in the crowd that remained hard, doubtful. But enough, more than enough to hold the pack together. When the assembly finally disbanded, Kale felt simultaneously exhausted and energized. He'd bought himself more time, had reinforced his position. But the real test was still to come. He returned to find Zaryanais awake, propped up on pillows waiting for him. She'd been listening to the assembly through the tent walls, and her expression was complex. You're a dangerous man, Kale Knight Fong, she said as he entered. The way you speak, the way you make people believe in impossible things. Is peace impossible? He moved to sit beside her, bone-weary. No, but us? This thing between us? That might be... She reached for his hand anyway, contradicting her own words. Even if your people accept peace with the Zealoth, even if we manage to broker coexistence, you're their king and I'm Shakur. There's no place for a paralyzed alien in the life of an Alpha King. Then I'll make a place, Kale said stubbornly, or I'll abdicate, walk away from the crown and live as a simple wolf. You can't do that. Your people need you. Maybe they need to learn that they can survive without me. That leadership isn't about one indispensable person, but about the principles we live by. He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her cool knuckles. I'm tired, Zarnes. Tired of fighting, tired of politics, tired of being what everyone else needs me to be. For once in my very long life, I want to be selfish. I want to choose what I want instead of what expected. And what do you want? He met her black eyes steadily. You. A life with you, whatever that looks like. Teaching together, maybe. In that settlement we're going to build. You educating the Zealoth young about adapting to this world. Me teaching young wolves about mercy and coexistence. Growing old together. Well, me growing old while you age at whatever pace your people age. Making this work against all odds and expectations. Tears gathered in Zarnice's eyes. The first Kale had ever seen her shed. They were crystalline, catching the lamplight like diamonds. You're describing a fantasy. So let's make it real. Let's be brave enough to build something impossible. She pulled him down to her. kissing him with a desperation that spoke of all the years she believed herself incapable of being loved, of all the loneliness she carried as a warrior who didn't quite fit the mold her society demanded. And Cale kissed her back with equal fervor, pouring into it all his determination, his stubborn refusal to accept that love had boundaries or limitations. The Zaleth Council's response came 2 weeks later. They would accept the terms, with modifications. A delegation would arrive in 1 month to finalize the details and sign a formal treaty. It wasn't perfect. There were provisions that Cale knew would be difficult for the wolves to accept, territorial concessions that would cause grumbling. But it was peace, real and tangible and possible. When he told Zarnes, she wept again, but this time from relief. "My daughter," she whispered. "Kieran IS will be in the first wave of colonists," the council promised. "I'll see her again. And she'll see a mother who helped broker peace between species," Cale said softly, "who proved that there's strength in adaptation, that being broken physically doesn't mean being broken in spirit." The month passed in a blur of preparations. Territory had to be surveyed, temporary housing constructed, protocols established for first contact between species. Cale threw himself into the work, and to his surprise, many of his wolves did as well. They were cautiously optimistic, ready to believe in this new possibility. The day the first Zaleth shuttle landed in Northern Valley, Cale stood with Zarin IS. He'd had a special chair constructed for her, not a wheelchair exactly, but a hybrid that could be carried by 2 wolves or propelled by her own arm strength. It was a compromise that allowed her both dignity and mobility. The shuttle door opened, and Zaleth began to emerge. Families, elderly, children, all looking around at their new home with expressions of wonder and apprehension. And then a young female broke from the group, running with the grace of youth, her crystalline crown catching the sunlight. "Mother." The cry was universal in its emotion, even if the word was alien. Zarin IS's composure shattered. She reached out her arms as her daughter fell into them, both of them speaking rapidly in their own language, tears flowing freely. Cale stood back, giving them their moment. But Kieran suddenly turned to him, her black eyes curious and grateful. "You're the Wolf King," she said in heavily accented common. "The one who saved my mother." "I am." "Thank you." She bowed deeply, a gesture of profound respect. "Thank you for seeing her worth when others saw only shock horror." "Her worth was always obvious," Cale replied. "It just needed the right eyes to see it." As the days turned into weeks, the settlement began to take shape. It wasn't easy. There were cultural clashes, misunderstandings, moments when old hatreds threatened to resurface. But gradually and possibly it worked. Zaleth and wolves learned to coexist, to appreciate each other's strengths, to build something new together. Zarnes began teaching as Cale had suggested, holding classes on Zaleth culture, biology, and history. Her students were both Zaleth young and curious wolves, all eager to understand the other species. She had adapted her teaching style to her physical limitations, and if anything, it made her more effective. Her students learned not just facts, but resilience, the ability to adapt and overcome. Cale found himself less involved in day-to-day governance, delegating more to the younger alphas who had proven themselves during the peace process. He still commanded respect, still held the crown, but he was gradually transitioning to a role more advisory than authoritarian. He spent his evenings with Zarnes in a small home they'd built at the edge of the settlement, neither fully in the wolf territory nor the Zaleth colony, but balanced between. They would sit on the porch, watching the sun set over their combined peoples, and talk about everything and nothing. "Do you regret it?" she asked him one evening, nearly a year after he'd pulled her from that battlefield. "Everything you gave up, everything you risked?" Cale looked at her, this impossible woman who had changed everything, who had taught him that real strength lay in choosing compassion over convenience. She'd adapted to her new reality with grace, had found purpose and meaning in a life very different from the one she'd imagined. "Not for a single second," he said honestly. "You were right that day on the battlefield. This was madness, but it's the best madness I've ever committed to." She laughed. "That sounds still rare enough to be precious. The Council of Elders came to see me yesterday. They wanted to discuss your performance as Alpha King." Cale raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and what did they want to discuss?" "They said that you've shown true leadership." that the peace is held better than anyone expected, that the coexistence is working, that you've proven them wrong about mercy being weakness. She paused, her expression sly. They also said that if you want to step down, they would understand, that you've earned the right to rest, to live for yourself rather than your people. Trying to get rid of me? Never, but offering you a choice. Zarnes reached for his hand. You don't have to be Alpha King anymore, Kale. You've done your part, proven your point. If you wanted to just be with me, with no crown or title or responsibility beyond what you choose. That's possible now. Kale thought about it, about all the centuries he'd carried the weight of leadership, about the freedom being offered, the chance to finally, truly rest. Marcus would make a good king, he mused. And I think I've taught him enough about mercy and strength to carry on what we started. So that's yes? Hope colored her voice. That's yes. I'll speak to the council, make it official, let someone younger and fresher take the crown. He pulled her close, careful always of her limitations, and kissed her forehead. I saved your life once, Zarnias, but you've saved mine in return. Saved me from becoming the monster I was turning into, reminded me what it means to choose right over easy. We saved each other then, she said softly, and we'll keep saving each other every day, in small ways and large. Always, Kale promised. They sat in comfortable silence as night fell, watching the lights of the settlement come on one by one. Wolf homes and Zaelith dwellings, side by side, a testament to the impossible becoming possible. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled a greeting to the rising moon, and from a Zaelith colony, a crystalline song rose in response. Not the same, but complementary, two different voices finding harmony. Kale had learned, over his long life, that courage came in many forms. The courage to fight was common, celebrated, easy to understand. But the courage to save, to show mercy, to love despite every reason not to, that was rare. That was the courage that truly changed the world. He had taught that lesson to his people, had shown them through his actions what real strength looked like. And in doing so, he had found not just peace for his world, but peace for himself. The paralyzed alien warrior girl who everyone had refused to save had saved them all in the end. And the alpha werewolf king who had refused to let her die had learned that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was choose love over hate, hope over despair, life over death. It was a lesson neither of them would ever forget, a truth they would carry forward into whatever future awaited them, together. But peace, Kale would learn, was never a destination. It was a constant choice, renewed every day. 6 months after the settlement's founding, on a morning when frost painted the world silver, Kale woke to find Zarnias already awake beside him, staring at the ceiling with an expression he'd learned meant she was wrestling with difficult thoughts. Tell me, he said softly, turning to face her. Kiranias is in love, Zarnias said, with a wolf, a young male named Finn. Kale felt a complex mix of emotions. Finn, the same young wolf who had lost his father to the Zaelith, who had been the first to pledge renewed loyalty at that crucial assembly. And how do you feel about that? Terrified, hopeful, uncertain, she finally looked at him. A year ago, I would have said such a union was impossible, unnatural. Now I look at us and realize we become living proof that impossible doesn't mean what we thought it meant. Are they happy? Deliriously so. And that's what terrifies me. Because happiness can be so fragile, Kale. One wrong word, one cultural misstep, one moment of prejudice from either side, and it could all shatter. Her hand found his. I want to protect her from that pain. You can't, Kale said gently. Any more than anyone could protected us from the pain we've endured to get here. All you can do is support her, teach her, and trust that she's strong enough to handle whatever comes. Zarnias was quiet for a long moment. When did you become so wise about parenthood? You've never had children of your own. It was true, and it was a regret Kale carried quietly. In his 700 years, he'd never found a mate, never had pups. The demands of leadership had always taken precedence, and then he'd simply outlived the possibility with wolves his own age. No, he admitted, but I've watched generations grow up under my rule. I've seen parents make every mistake possible, and a few right choices too. The best of them knew when to hold on, and when to let go. Is that what we're doing? Letting go, in a way, but also holding on to what matters, the love, the connection, the hope that they'll make better choices than we did. Later that day, Kira Nias and Finn came to visit. The young couple radiated that particular joy of new love, but there was nervousness too. They wanted Kale and Zaranias' blessing, though they were careful not to demand it. Kale watched Finn carefully as the young wolf explained his feelings. Earnest, respectful, clearly devoted to Kira Nias. And he saw in Finn's eyes something he recognized, the willingness to stand against the world for the person he loved. My father would have hated this, Finn said quietly. He died hating the Zalith. If he could see me now in love with one. He trailed off, pain flickering across his young face. Your father loved you, Kale said firmly. And love, real love, wants happiness for those it touches. Maybe he would have struggled at first. Maybe it would have taken time. But I believe he would come around, because that's what love does. It adapts, it grows, it chooses a person over the prejudice. Do you really believe that? Finn asked, desperate for reassurance. I do, because I've seen it happen, am living proof of it happening. Your love for Kira Nias doesn't dishonor your father's memory. If anything, it honors it by proving that his death and all the deaths in that war weren't meaningless. They led to this, to a world where a wolf and a Zalith can fall in love, without it meaning betrayal. Kira spoke then, her voice soft but determined. I want children someday. The medical experts say it might be possible. Our species are compatible enough, with assistance. But I need to know that any children we have won't be seen as abominations, as mistakes. I need to know they'll have a place in this world. Zarnas reached out, taking her daughter's hand. They'll have a place because we'll make sure of it. Because your mother was Shakor and still found purpose. Because you love a wolf and that love is real and valid. Because the world is changing and children like yours will be proof that change can be beautiful. The young couple left eventually, reassured and glowing with happiness. After they'd gone, Kale and Zaya sat in silence, processing what their blessing might mean. Hybrid children, Zarnas mused. A generation that belongs to both species, and neither. It's terrifying. It's hope, Kale countered. The kind we build futures on. The years flow by like a river, sometimes smooth, sometimes turbulent, but always moving forward. Kale officially abdicated after 2 years, passing the crown to Marcus in a ceremony that brought wolves from every territory. His former second-in-command proved to be everything Kale had hoped. Firm but fair, willing to uphold the peace while still defending wolf interests. Freed from the demands of kingship, Kale found himself settling into a role he'd never imagined. Teacher, mediator, and living symbol of what reconciliation looked like. He and Zarnas became fixtures in the settlement. The unlikely couple that everyone knew, that children of both species pointed to as proof that love transcended boundaries. Zaranias' daughter gave birth to the first wolf-Zalith hybrid 3 years after the settlement's founding. The child, a girl they named Sarah, after the human doctor who had changed Kale's life, was born with characteristics of both species. She had the iridescent skin of the Zalith, but could shift into a form that resembled a wolf pup. Her eyes were black like her mother's, but they glowed gold when her wolf nature surfaced. The birth sparked debate, as Kale had known it would. There were wolves who saw Sarah as an abomination, Zalith who considered her shamor, mixed blood, impure. But there were also many who saw her as a miracle, proof that two species could not just coexist, but blend into something new and beautiful. Kale held Sarah for the first time when she was 3 days old, this tiny being who represented everything he and Zarnas had fought for. She looked up at him with those strange, beautiful eyes and made a sound that was half gurgle, half growl. Something in his ancient heart cracked open, and he found tears streaming down his face. She's perfect, he whispered to Zarnas, who watched from her chair with her own eyes wet. Absolutely perfect. She's terrifying, Zarnas corrected, but her voice was full of love, because now there's no going back. Sarah exists, and more like her will follow. We've created something irreversible. Good, Kale said fiercely. Let there be no going back. Let there be only forward, into whatever strange and beautiful future these children will build. More hybrid children followed over the years. Not many. The process was difficult, and not all couples chose that path. But enough that a small generation began to grow. Children who belonged to both worlds and would someday bridge them in ways Kale and Zarnes never could. Kale watched these children with fascination and hope. They played together, Wolf and Zaleth and hybrid, inventing games that combined elements of both cultures. They learned 2 languages simultaneously, celebrated both sets of holidays, and seemed genuinely confused when adults tried to explain why their peoples had ever been enemies. "They're going to save us all," Zarnes said one evening, watching a mixed group of children playing in the settlement square. This generation that doesn't understand hate, that sees differences as interesting rather than threatening. "Maybe," Kale agreed, "or maybe we save them by giving them a world where they don't have to choose." But not everyone was convinced. Tension still flared, especially during times of scarcity or stress. There were wolves who resented the Zaleth presence, Zaleth who chafed under what they saw as restrictive conditions. Small conflict erupted, usually resolved through mediation, but sometimes escalating into violence. 10 years after the settlement's founding, a group of young wolves attacked the Zaleth family, motivated by old hatred and new grievances. The family survived, but the incident sent shockwaves through the community. It threatened to unravel everything that had been built. Marcus came to Kale, his face grave. The council is calling for exile of the attackers. But the wolf community is divided. Some say the punishment is too harsh, that the Zaleth provoked them. Did they? Kale asked, "Does it matter?" Violence is violence. It matters for justice, not for the punishment. That should fit the crime regardless, but for preventing future incidents. Kale stood, feeling his age for the first time in years. Set up a truth council. Let both sides speak. Let witnesses testify. And make the proceedings public. Let everyone see that justice applies equally. The Truth Council revealed a complicated picture. The Zaleth family had indeed been confrontational, had made remarks about wolves being primitive, but that didn't justify the attack, didn't excuse the broken bones and terror inflicted on children. In the end, the young wolves were exiled for 5 years, with the possibility of return if they showed genuine rehabilitation. The Zaleth family was censured for their inflammatory behavior, assigned cultural sensitivity training. It satisfied no one completely, but it was fair, and fairness was sometimes the best that could be achieved. Kale found himself exhausted by the incident in a way he hadn't been by physical battle. Fighting enemies was simple. Building peace was complex, messy, and never-ending. "I'm tired," he admitted to Zarnes that night. "So tired of trying to hold the world together through sheer force of will." "Then don't," she said simply. "You've done your part, Kale. More than your part. You don't have to fix every problem, heal every wound. But if I don't, others will. Marcus, the younger generation, the hybrid children who will grow up and create solutions we can't even imagine yet." She reached for him, pulling him close. "You saved me when everyone else would have let me die. You brokered peace when everyone said it was impossible. You spent 15 years building something beautiful and fragile and necessary. That's enough. You're allowed to rest now. And you," he looked at her, at this woman who had become the center of his world. "Are you tired too?" "Every day," she admitted. "My body may have stopped working the way it once did, but my mind keeps going, keeps worrying, keeps trying to solve the unsolvable. I think about Kirinias and her family, about Sarah and the other hybrid children, about my people on Zaldar, those who didn't make it here before the evacuation ended, about all the ways this could still fall apart. Then let's rest together," Kale suggested. "Retire fully. Let the younger ones take over completely. Spend our days teaching when asked, but otherwise just living, being together without the weight of the world on our shoulders." Zarnes smiled, that expression that still made his heart skip. "You're asking me to grow old with you, Wolf King?" "I am. Though I suppose I'm not a Wolf King anymore, just a wolf. And you're not a commander, just a teacher. Just 2 people who found each other against all odds and chose to keep choosing each other every day since." "Then yes," she said. "Yes, I'll grow old with you. Whatever years we have left, Let's spend them being selfish, being happy, being us. They moved to a smaller home on the outskirts of the settlement, a place with a garden where Zarnias could cultivate Zalith plants alongside Earth flora, creating hybrids that shouldn't exist but flourished anyway. Kale built additions to the house to accommodate her needs. Wider doorways, ramps, a workspace designed for someone who works sitting down. They taught occasionally when students sought them out. They babysat their grandchildren, the hybrid pups and Zalith young, who called them grandmother and grandfather in 2 languages. They watched sunsets and argued about philosophy and made love with the careful intensity of people who had learned their bodies together over years of adaptation and compromise. Kale aged as all wolves did eventually, his dark hair silvering, his face gaining lines that spoke of both sorrow and joy. Zarnias' crystalline crown dulled slightly, her iridescent skin losing some of its luster. They were growing old together, as they promised, and it was everything. On their 20th anniversary, not the settlement's founding, but the day Kale had pulled Zarnias from that battlefield. They held a small celebration. Kirinias and Finn came with their children, now 4 in total. Marcus attended, still strong and capable as Alpha King. Young adults who had been children when the settlement began arrived, bringing their own children. Sarah, the first hybrid, was now a striking young woman of 17 who spoke passionately about joining the diplomatic corps, about helping establish contact with other Zalith colonies on distant worlds. She had her mother's determination and her father's heart, and looking at her, Kale could see the future unfolding. Complicated, uncertain, but full of possibility. As the party wound down and guests departed, Kale and Zarnias found themselves alone on their porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Zarnias asked, "When I begged you to finish me? I said I don't grant death to those who can still live. I was so angry at you for that, so certain you were condemning me to a fate worse than death." She turned to look at him, her black eyes still capable of stealing his breath. "I was wrong. This life, this strange, impossible, beautiful life we built, it's been worth every moment of pain, every sacrifice, every hard choice. Even the parts where you're stuck with a stubborn old wolf who refuses to listen to reason, especially those parts." She laughed. "You know what the greatest gift you gave me was? It wasn't saving my life. It was showing me that my life had value beyond my ability to fight, that I could be more than a weapon, more than Shakor. You saw me when I couldn't see myself. And you," Kale said softly, "taught me that courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about being terrified and doing the right thing anyway. You were paralyzed, defeated, at my mercy, and still you found the strength to help broker peace. Still you adapted, survived, thrived. You've been my teacher as much as I've been yours." They sat in comfortable silence as night deepened, 2 beings from different worlds who had found their place together. Around them, the settlement hummed with life. Wolves howling greetings to moon, Zalith singing their crystalline evening prayers, hybrid children calling good night in 2 languages. It wasn't perfect. There were still problems, still conflicts, still moments when old hatreds threatened to resurface. But it was real, and it was lasting, and it was proof that choosing mercy over vengeance could build something worth having. Kale thought about all the wolves who had challenged him, who had called him weak, who had questioned his fitness to lead. He wondered if they could see this now, see the thriving settlement, the mixed families, the children who didn't know how to hate. He wondered if they understood that this was strength, real strength, the kind that built futures instead of destroying them. "What are you thinking?" Zarnias asked, reading his contemplative silence. "That I was right," Kale said simply. "That day on the battlefield, every instinct told me to save you, and I was right to listen. Not because it was easy or convenient or politically smart, but because it was necessary. You were the test, Zarnias, the universe's way of asking me who I wanted to be, the king everyone expected, or the person I needed to become. And what did you become? Someone better than I was. Someone worthy of your love, of the peace we built, of the future those children will create." He took her hand, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. Someone who understands that the greatest courage isn't in fighting battles, but in choosing to save even one life when everyone says to let them die. "My wolf king," Zarnias murmured. My stubborn, impossible, beautiful wolf king. Not a king anymore, Kale reminded her. Just a wolf. No, she corrected gently. You'll always be a king. Not because of crown or title, but because of what you taught everyone. That true royalty is measured in compassion, not conquest. That legacy will outlive both of us. They would both be proven right in ways neither could fully anticipate. The settlement would grow, would face challenges and overcome them, would become a model for other integrated communities. Sarah and her generation would bridge worlds, would become diplomats and teachers and leaders in their own right. And always, in the histories they would write, in the stories they would tell, there would be the tale of the paralyzed Zilla warrior and the alpha wolf king. The story of how one choice, one moment of mercy when everyone demanded vengeance, had changed the course of two species' futures. It would become legend, embellished and mythologized over the years. But at its heart will remain a simple truth, that love could transcend any boundary, that courage came in many forms, and that sometimes the bravest thing anyone could do was save a life when everyone else refused. Kale lived another 30 years, long for a werewolf, his age finally catching up with his body. Zarias was with him at the end, holding his hand as his breath grew shallow, his heart slowed. "Thank you," he whispered with his last strength, "for letting me save you, for saving me in return. Always," she promised, tears flowing freely. "In every life, in every world, I will always choose you." He smiled, squeezed her hand once more, and then slipped away peacefully, surrounded by love. Zarias lived 5 more years without him, teaching until her last days, telling anyone who would listen about the Wolf King who had refused to let her die, who had shown her that broken didn't mean worthless. When her time came, she went willingly, eager to discover the afterlife held the possibility of reunion. They were buried side by side in the garden they had cultivated together, under a marker that bore inscriptions in both languages. And on the anniversary of Kale pulling Zarnias from that battlefield, the settlement would gather to honor them, not as king and commander, not as symbols, but as two people who had loved courageously, lived fully, and left the world better than they'd found it. The paralyzed alien warrior girl that everyone refused to save had indeed saved them all. And the alpha werewolf king who had defied his entire species to give her a chance had taught a lesson that echoed through generations. That mercy was not weakness, that love was not limited, and that true courage meant choosing compassion even when the entire world demanded otherwise. It was a lesson written in the foundations of everything that came after, in the integrated communities, in the hybrid children, in the peace that held despite its fragility. And it would endure, a testament to two impossible people who had found each other in the midst of war and chosen to build peace instead. Their story ended, but the world they had created lived on, growing and changing and becoming something neither could have imagined. And that, perhaps, was the greatest testament of all, that love, once planted in fertile soil and tended with care, could grow beyond the gardeners who first cultivated it, could bloom in ways that touched countless lives across countless generations. The end, but also always a beginning,